LSR's scheme is not focused on Texas, but he does have some interesting observations about the Texas political culture. He contends that, as the dominant culture type in the state, traditionalism means that, quote, in Texas, the preservation of cultural patterns manifests itself concretely in wide circles as anti-federal, anti-social welfare, and anti-tax radicalism, tied in with the very clear economic interests in the state, end quote. In other words, traditionally, Texans have resisted the federal government sticking its nose into our business. We don't like government assistance to the poor, and while no one likes paying taxes, apparently, according to LSR, opposition to taxes in Texas is exaggerated because he calls Texans anti-tax radicals. With respect to the individualism subculture of the state, LSR writes, quote, individualism in Texas is exalted over community. Texans see few legitimate social goals as separate from private or individual goals. Economic development particularly excludes other matters from the public agenda. And whereas formerly racial segregation was the great unifying issue, it is now being replaced by a common interest in economic development. Economic development is the political issue of the greatest internal unity in Texas, end quote. In other words, the individualism influence on the Texas political culture means that if you can't get Texans to agree on anything else, you can get agreement on the importance of a favorable business climate. When LSR initially developed his culture scheme in the 1970s, many of his observations were largely impressionistic. That is, he did not provide a lot of empirical evidence to substantiate his impressions. Other political scientists have subsequently tested many of LSR's impressions against the data and found substantial support for hypotheses derived from LSR's scheme. What are some of the things we might examine to determine whether there is any reason to believe the cultural patterns suggested by LSR might be indicated in real-world data? Let's consider his assertions regarding the views of the different culture types towards politics. If LSR is right when he suggests that moralistic culture sees politics as a healthy civic enterprise, and the traditionalistic culture type sees politics as a privilege, what sort of patterns might we see in the data? What should we look at? One of the most obvious variables we might examine would be voter turnout. What testable hypotheses might we derive from LSR's scheme? Here's one that might be relatively easy to test. Moralistic states are likely to have higher levels of voter turnout than states with individualistic or traditionalistic culture. While we don't use any sophisticated statistical analysis to test this hypothesis, we can at least look at some data. This table shows voter turnout in each state for the 2012 presidential election, ranked from highest to lowest voter turnout. It shows the percentage of voting eligible population in each state that actually cast ballots in the election. I have added the state's dominant culture types for analysis. Our hypothesis suggests that most of the states having dominant moralistic culture should rank high on the list, and states having dominant traditionalistic or individualistic culture should rank lower. While we are only eyeballing the data, what initial conclusion can we reach? Does there appear to be support for a hypothesis? While certainly it is not a perfect correlation and we are only looking at one election, clearly there seems to be some evidence to support the idea that there are cultural patterns in voter turnout. 13 of the 17 moralistic states are ranked in the top half of the states, with 6 of the top-ranked states being moralistic. 12 of the 17 traditionalistic states are in the bottom half, with 8 of the bottom 10 being traditionalistic.